It's November, cold enough that the rain feels personal. She's standing outside a shoe store looking at a pair of boots in the window. They're $180. She does the math in her head. Rent is due in 9 days. There's a school trip deposit she hasn't paid yet, and the account is sitting at $67 until Friday. So she walks 2 blocks down to the discount shop and buys a pair for $19. They're fine. They'll do for now. They last about 4 months. Spring comes, the soles separate, and she throws them out. The next winter, she buys another pair, same store, same shelf, roughly the same price. The winter after that, the same. And the winter after that, 5 years later, she has spent just under $100 on boots. She has had wet feet, more or less, every single winter. The woman who bought the $180 pair in year 1, dry feet, every year, for a decade, for less money in total than the woman who couldn't afford to be warm. What if being poor wasn't just a starting point? What if it was a tax, invisible, constant, and compounding, charged by a system that most of us were never taught to see? There is a story we tell about poverty in this culture. It goes something like this. People are poor because of the choices they make. They spend impulsively, they don't plan ahead, they buy the wrong things, they prioritize the wrong values. And if they would just make better decisions, budget more carefully, spend more wisely, think more long-term, they could work their way out. I want to be careful here, because I'm not saying choices don't matter. They do. But this story, the one where poverty is primarily a decision problem, leaves out something fundamental. It leaves out the part where the system charges more for having less. Before a single choice is made, before the first bad decision or the first missed opportunity, just for existing in a lower income bracket, people pay a premium. More per unit of food, more for credit, more for insurance, more for banking, more for time. Economists and researchers actually have a name for this. They call it the poverty premium. And it is not a theory or a political opinion. It is a documented, measurable, quantifiable phenomenon. The financial system, the one that was supposed to create opportunity, is structurally designed in ways that extract more from people who have less and deliver more to people who have more. That's not an accident. It's not a glitch. And understanding it changes the entire frame through which you look at financial struggle, your own or someone else's. If you have ever done everything you were supposed to do and still found yourself behind, still found yourself stressed, still found the math not adding up in ways that felt inexplicable, this video is for you. Not to make you angry, though some of this is genuinely worth being angry about, but to give you a clearer picture of the terrain you've been navigating, because you can't find your way through something you can't see. Let's start with something as basic as food, because I think food is where the poverty premium becomes impossible to argue with. You've probably heard the phrase, it's cheaper to eat healthy. And in one narrow sense, if you have unlimited time, a car, a Costco membership, and enough cash up front to buy in bulk, yes, the per unit cost of rice and beans and frozen vegetables is lower than fast food. That math is real. But the math that often goes unexamined is everything surrounding that math. About 1 in 5 Americans' lives in what researchers call a food desert, a neighborhood where there is no full-service grocery store within a reasonable distance. The nearest option is a corner store or a dollar store, where a can of soup costs 40% more than it does at the supermarket across town, and fresh produce either doesn't exist or is wilted and overpriced. Getting to the supermarket across town requires a car you might not have, or transit time you might not be able to afford, or both. And bulk buying, the single most effective way to lower your per unit food cost, requires cash up front. It requires a buffer. If your account has $60 in it, until Friday, you cannot buy the $40 bag of rice that would feed your family for 3 months, even if you know perfectly well it's the smarter financial move. The knowledge doesn't change the cash flow. And so you buy the small bag for more per ounce every single week. You spend more over time for less food, not because you didn't understand the math, but because the math required resources you didn't have access to. The system charges you for not having enough to buy more of it. That's the poverty premium in its most literal form. Now let's talk about banking, because I think this is the one that when people really understand it, changes how they see the financial industry entirely. In the United States, the 5 largest banks collected somewhere in the range of $11 billion in overdraft fees in a single recent year. $11 billion. And the critical detail, the one that turns this from an inconvenience into a structural extraction mechanism, is where those fees come from. Research has consistently shown that approximately 75% of all overdraft fees are paid by just 9% of account holders. Those 9% are overwhelmingly people with the lowest account balances, people living closest to the edge. Here's how it works in practice. You have $12 in your account. You forget about a recurring charge, a small one, maybe $6. The charge goes through. Your account goes to negative $6. The bank charges you a $35 overdraft fee. You now owe the bank $41, and you had $12 to begin with. You get paid Friday, the fee gets taken out, and your next pay period begins $41 shorter than it should have. Repeat this 3 or 4 times in a year, which research shows is common for people living close to the financial edge. And you've paid $150 in fees for the privilege of occasionally having slightly less money than you thought. You paid the bank for being poor. The person with a $5,000 buffer in their account never triggers an overdraft. They pay nothing. Their banking, for all practical purposes, is free. Yours is subsidized by the fees you pay. The industry calls it free checking. It's free for the people who need the subsidy least. Credit works the same way. And I want to spend some time here because I think the credit system is one of the most psychologically insidious parts of the poverty premium. If you have never had credit, no credit card, no loan, no financing, your credit score reflects that absence. And the penalty for having no credit history is, in practical terms, nearly identical to the penalty for having bad credit history. You are treated as a risk. You pay higher interest rates on loans if you can get them at all. You may be denied for an apartment. You may be required to put down larger deposits on utilities. You are charged more and trusted less. For the act of having lived outside the credit system, often because no one ever helped you into it, or because the products available at your income level didn't require it, or because the first time you tried to build credit, something went wrong and nobody explained how to recover. The cruelest part is that credit building requires credit. To demonstrate that you can handle borrowed money responsibly, you need someone to lend you money first. And the people who most need that first step are the ones who find it hardest to access, because the system uses their lack of history as a reason to deny them entry. It's a door that requires a key to open, and you can only get the key from inside the room. And so people turn to the products that don't require credit history. Payday loans, rent-to-own agreements, check cashing services. These products exist specifically to serve the market that the mainstream financial system has decided is too risky to include, and they are priced accordingly. A payday loan with a 2-week term can carry an annualized interest rate of 300% or more, not because the lenders are uniquely predatory by nature, but because the market structure creates a captive customer base with no alternatives. And captive markets get priced at whatever the traffic will bear. Now I want to introduce something that I think is the hidden engine underneath all of this, the behavioral layer that makes the poverty premium not just financially draining, but psychologically exhausting in a very specific way. In 2013, 2 researchers, Sendhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir, published a book called Scarcity. And what they found through a series of studies was that the experience of not having enough of any resource, but especially money, doesn't just create practical problems, it creates a cognitive one. When your mind is occupied with financial stress, with the constant mental math of, can I cover this? What happens if I can't? How do I bridge this gap? It consumes working memory. It narrows focus. It makes it genuinely harder to think clearly about anything that isn't the immediate crisis. They called this the bandwidth tax, and it explains something important, why people in financial stress sometimes make decisions that look, from the outside, like poor planning. It's not that they're less capable of thinking long-term. It's that the cognitive resources required for long-term thinking are being consumed by the immediate, constant pressure of survival-level finance. The mental bandwidth required to comparison shop, to research the better insurance option, to plan 3 months ahead, to read the fine print, that bandwidth is already spoken for. It's being used to manage today. This is not a moral failing. It is a predictable, documented human response to a particular kind of cognitive load. And the system, the one that charges overdraft fees, prices insurance by zip code, and puts the payday lender on the corner of every low-income neighborhood benefits from that narrowed focus. A person in scarcity mode is less likely to notice the fee structure, less likely to have time to switch banks, less likely to have the bandwidth to shop around. The system doesn't need people to be incapable. It just needs them to be busy enough that they can't look up. There's one more layer I want to name, and it's the one that doesn't show up in any fee schedule or interest rate. It's the cost of time. Being financially efficient in the way that personal finance content usually describes it requires time. Cooking from scratch instead of buying prepared food takes time. Walking to the cheaper grocery store takes time. Calling the bank to dispute a fee takes time. Researching credit unions takes time. And time for a person working 2 jobs or working irregular hours or caring for children without support. Time is not a free resource. The advice to just cook more meals at home assumes a person has the hours to shop for ingredients, prepare them, and clean up afterward, after whatever their day already required of them. The advice to compare prices before you buy assumes you have a moment in your schedule to do that research. The advice to build an emergency fund assumes there is something left after the month's obligations are met from which a fund could be built. When financial advice ignores time poverty, it mistakes the output of a constrained system for the preference of the person inside it. It sees the fast food receipt and says bad choice without asking what the choice looked like from inside a 12-hour shift with no break and a hungry kid waiting at home. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. It's designed to serve people with capital, with time, with cash buffers, with credit history, with geographic access. And for everyone else, it charges more for everything. Here's where I want to sit with you for a moment, because I think this is the part that matters most. Understanding the poverty premium doesn't make it disappear. Knowing that overdraft fees are structurally regressive doesn't put money back in your account. Recognizing the scarcity mindset doesn't instantly free up cognitive bandwidth that's genuinely under pressure. I want to be honest about that, because I think false hope is worse than no comfort at all. But here's what understanding does do. It changes the story you tell yourself, because the story most of us have absorbed, consciously or not, about financial struggle is that it reflects something about us. Our discipline, our intelligence, and our worthiness. And when you're carrying that story and you're also carrying the actual weight of the poverty premium, you're carrying 2 heavy things: the system itself and the shame of believing the system is your fault. Awareness lifts the second weight. Not immediately and not completely. These stories are deep and they were put there early. But there is a genuine relief, one that I think many people who encounter this research describe, in learning that what they've been experiencing has a name, that it's documented, that researchers have studied it, measured it, written about it, that it is a systemic phenomenon, not a personal failure dressed up as economics. That relief is not just emotional. It's functionally useful. When you stop spending cognitive energy on self-blame, some of that bandwidth becomes available for navigation. Not grand, not a complete escape from a system that is genuinely hard to escape. Just clarity, a slightly less narrowed focus, the ability to look up for a moment and see what's actually around you. That's not nothing. In the context of scarcity, that's actually quite a lot. I want to be careful here not to undermine everything we just talked about by ending with a list of things you should have been doing all along. That's not what this is. These aren't hacks. They're small exits, places where, if the conditions allow it, you can step out of one layer of the premium at a time. If you have no credit history, a secured credit card, one where you deposit a small amount as collateral and then use the card for small regular purchases you'd make anyway, is the most direct path into the credit system that the mainstream financial world actually rewards. It's slow. It takes months. But it addresses the door that requires a key problem at the most fundamental level. Credit unions are worth knowing about. They are member-owned financial institutions that typically charge lower fees, offer lower rate loans, and are structurally less incentivized to profit from overdrafts than commercial banks. They're not universally available or universally better, but for a lot of people, they represent a meaningful step away from the banking structure that disproportionately extracts from low balance accounts. If bulk buying is something you're considering, the honest question to ask first is whether your cash flow actually allows it right now, not whether it's a good idea in theory. But buying in bulk when you're cash flow thin can create the very gaps that trigger the overdraft fees you're trying to avoid. The timing matters as much as the strategy. And the time audit, this one I think is genuinely underused. Just spend a week noticing where your time goes, specifically in relation to money. Not to optimize aggressively, but to see clearly. Sometimes there's a task that's costing you 3 hours and could be solved with $20. Sometimes there's a task you're paying someone for that you could reclaim. The audit doesn't prescribe an answer. It just makes the trade-offs visible. These are not solutions to the poverty premium. The poverty premium is a systemic problem, and individual actions are not systemic solutions. But they are small, real, available places where one layer at a time, the cost of having less can be reduced a little. And a little, sustained over time, still matters. You watch this video. And I don't want to be glib about what that means, but I also don't want to let it pass without saying it clearly. The fact that you're here seeking out information about a system that most people never think to question is its own kind of financial act. Understanding a system is the first condition for changing your relationship to it. Not changing the system necessarily. That's larger and slower and requires more of us together than any one person can do alone. But changing your relationship to it, the story you carry, the shame you put down, the clarity you gain, that's available right now. Because of this conversation, the poverty premium is real. It is heavy, and it falls on people who are already carrying enough. But the people it falls on are not defined by it. You are not the tax the system charges you. You are the person who looked up long enough to see it clearly. And when more of us can see it, name it, talk about it, recognize it in our own lives and in the lives of people we know, it becomes harder to explain away, harder to dismiss as individual failure, harder to ignore. That matters. More than any single financial decision, that matters. If this video helped you feel less alone in something you've been navigating, pass it on. Not for the numbers, not for the algorithm, though I'll be honest, both help. Pass it on because there is someone in your life who's been carrying the weight of a system they couldn't see, blaming themselves for something that was never entirely their fault. And they deserve to hear this too. And if you want to keep thinking about money this way, through systems and psychology and honest math rather than shame and willpower, then subscribe. Not because I'm asking you to, because you already know this conversation isn't finished, and neither are we.